What were the kind of films that you saw in Paris which sort of triggered this connection to the poetry and the music?
Well, I saw so many films, that I didn't know about. Films by Ray from India, films, Japanese films by Naruse and Ozu, films by Jarmusch, films by Jacques Rivette and the Nouvelle Vague, classical French films, a lot of Hollywood films from the 40s and 50s. Great directors like Sam Fuller and Nick Ray and Billy Wilder, Max O'Fools, who worked in Europe and the US. So it was just like a wealth of all different types of films.
Obviously, from that point of view, the exposure to films you otherwise would not have seen, the film school sort of system has a role. But other directors that obviously we've spoken to have sort of, in a way, poo-pooed. They've gone, film school, you forget about film school, you've got to get behind a camera. Do you believe in film schools from the technical point of view, or?
I don't really. I think I would agree. I had a few people that taught in the film school that were very good and opened up my own perception about filmmaking. But a lot of it I really had to unlearn or ignore. And I also didn't get a degree in film school because my final year I got a kind of a scholarship, actually called the Louis B. Mayer Scholarship. Louis B. Mayer being, for me, a kind of villain because he destroyed Erich von Stroheim's film Greed and destroyed Buster Keaton's some of his films. But in his name, I got a scholarship that was sent to me directly rather than the film school. So rather than pay tuition, I made my first film, a short feature-length film called Permanent Vacation. And that was not acceptable by the school, so I wasn't given a degree. I was some years later, but so I wasn't really so involved in film school, but I did meet some good people there, people that I met Spike Lee there, and Tom DiCillo, and Sarah Driver, and some interesting people. But the school itself, I really think, for example, you weren't allowed to take courses in cinema history. It was all technical things about filmmaking, which is great, and I learned a lot from it. But to me, without being interested in the history of cinema or the history of expression in general, that's where your inspiration comes from. You can be driven by great examples of expression before you. So that seemed kind of a drag that you couldn't really even access those things in film school. There was a class they were giving on Giga Vertov, and it was a seminar, and I wasn't allowed to take it, but I kept going each time, and each time the professor would say, "You're not in this class," and ask me to leave. So after the fifth time, I stopped trying, but it was very difficult to see Giga Vertov's films in New York, as it still is, and they were showing all of them. So I was like hungry to see them, but I was told to leave each time. So I found that kind of disconcerting.
What problem did they have with Permanent Vacation?
They didn't want you to make a feature-length film as your thesis project in film school. They wanted a 20-minute film. But friends of mine at the time, this is at the beginning of what is now called like punk rock period of New York in the late 70s, and friends like Amos Poe and Eric Mitchell, James Nares, Beth and Scott B., a lot of people were making films on their own. And so I wanted to make one as well, and so I proceeded to do so, and I wasn't following the rules of the school,
Have you ever followed the rules?
Well, I think rules are very valuable. I think they set up things, and I think you kind of have to know the rules in order to break them. I really liked, now it's over 10 years ago, this theory, Dogma 95, which was learning the rules and then reducing them to the most minimum rules. And I never made a film following Dogma 95, but I liked the concept of it. It was sort of, for me, kind of like the Ramones or the Sex Pistols approach to rock and roll, like stripping it down to the essential elements. and using those as a kind of expression.